promise I don't get nervous person. Like, I like a lot of electronic stuff going on. It's going to be like a multimedia thing today. Whew. I got some PowerPoint for you. Explain a few things. And we're going to do a little review of male reproduction. And we're going to talk about female reproduction, anatomy, and physiology in parallel to what we did with males. We started with the males because it's simpler, but also there's some things that we can explain that's pertinent to female reproductive physiology. So before we start, I want to show you something. I hope this is going to work.
That appears to me to be a major operation.
Well, it's certainly not minor surgery, and moderately expensive at that. The most conservative method should be tried first.
After an implant has been implanted, can natural erection be achieved?
No. All your erections must stem from the use of the device.
So never again would you have erections naturally.
That's correct. If the implants were taken out, you would never again have any erection.
Okay. It's funny. That's from like 30 years ago, and I actually have no idea why I actually, and they give you an idea. It's like actually on PHS. Yes, I don't know what this is anymore. And I have no idea why I have it, but it was critical because what happened at the time, well, as men get older, we'll talk later, they often experience impotency or erectile dysfunction. And prior to what you just saw, the fix for that was they would actually put like plastic or silicone, some kind of rods into your corpus cavernosum, so that basically you had an artificial erection all the time. So what that was showing was this new technology where, almost like my balloon, they would insert this inflatable thing into the corpus, so they would clean out the corpus cavernosum, insert this inflatable like two balloons. I don't know if you heard what he was saying, but then there was a pump that would fit into your scrotum. And so if you wanted to get an erection, you pump this pump up in the scrotum. But you can control when and where you would get an erection. But as you heard, you could no longer function normally. So a big breakthrough, actually, when I was in graduate school, was this compound, as you probably heard of, called Viagra. So I'm going to tell you how Viagra works. But first, I know every year there's some confusion about some of the erectile mechanisms. So I made a PowerPoint that's a little better than the drawings that I have. And let me just start that up. So let's see, switch. Yeah. So here's the deal. Remember that this lumen, where the blood is going to come through, is surrounded by an endothelial layer that has no capacity to contract or expand, but that itself is surrounded by a myoepithelial layer that can contract and relax. When it's relaxed, blood can flow through. When it's contracted, like when you're flaccid, blood can't go through. But again, relaxation allows the blood to go through. That's the basic simple principle, right? You guys get that part? So, what I'm going to do now is break it down so I can explain to you again exactly what's happening in the myoepithelium. The calcium, voltage-gated calcium channels open and allow the calcium to come in. There's also calcium coming out through the IP3 channels. They bind with the calmodulin, and the calcium calmodulin activates the myosin light chain kinase. The myosin light chain kinase, everything that's green means it's turned on. Activates the myosin light chain. Of course, the myosin light chain is then phosphorylated. That allows it to interact with actin, and that allows contraction. We're going to send you a video showing how it happens. When you get an erection, though, nitric oxide comes in. It's a neurotransmitter. It comes into the cell, just diffuses in, and it binds to the guanidinoate cyclase and activates. That activation involves conversion of GTP to cyclic GMP. The cyclic GMP activates the protein kinase G. And the protein kinase G does a number of things. It shuts off the IP3 so no more calcium is coming out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. It shuts off the voltage-gated calcium channel so no more calcium is coming in. It opens up a channel that allows the calcium to go out. I think I said that part. But it also opens up a potassium channel that allows potassium to go out. And that hyperpolarizes the cell. So the calcium can no longer come into the voltage-gated cell. As a result, the calcium is no longer available to the calmodulin. And that means you end up just reversing the whole process. Myosin light chain kinase goes off. The myosin light chain is actually dephosphorylated by the myosin light chain phosphatase. And as a result, the myosin light chain no longer interacts with actin, and you get a relaxation. That relaxation, of course, means blood can flow through. Now, you don't have the erection forever, because phosphodiesterase comes in. Phosphodiesterase turns cyclic GMP into GMP, which deactivates the PKG, which means you reverse all this process. The way that Viagra works is Viagra comes in, it shuts off the phosphodiesterase, so it reverses and gives you more cyclic GMP. So all that stuff that happened before the cyclic GMP happens. So that's the key to how Viagra works. And it allows you to maintain an erection. You guys got all that? There's one thing I have to correct from last time. I accidentally showed you the potassium is coming in. It's actually going out. So make sure you correct that one here. I hope you enjoyed that. It took me a long, long time to put that together. All right. Alright, so again, correct this. I checked with mine, I didn't say the wrong thing. The potassium is going out, not coming in. And by the potassium going out, because it's going out down its concentration gradient, it leaves the cell more negative. And you guys probably know from other classes, when the cell's more negative, when it's hyperpolarized, these calcium, can you guys see my red dot? These calcium channels don't open back up. Does that all make sense? Then I'll go back one step. Stuff we didn't do last time. It's this step. So this is how to apply the whole thing's deactivated. Right? So you're going to lose the erection once you take the cyclic GMP and it's converted to GMP, because now the PKG is no longer activated. And that essentially reverses everything that the PKG was doing.
What's the signal for the cell to make the PDE?
PDE's always there. That's a good question. I think it's probably just a matter of turnover, right? Because it's always there, and in fact, because nobody really knows why you get erectile dysfunction. But what Viagra is doing is actually slowing down the PDE. So it's not actually giving you erection, it's sort of making it possible for you to get an erection, because it causes the accumulation of the cyclic GMP. But what? There's probably just a normal turnover, and as long as the nitric oxide isn't coming in again, like you are not being aroused, then the PD takes care of all the cyclic GMP. Then I wanted to clarify one other thing that I know has been problematic in the past. So here, so this is the cross section, like the one I drew on the board, and we're going to make the PowerPoint available. You have to set it to your own music and all that. PowerPoint will make it available. Make sure you have all the little interactions. So the other thing I want to point out that I know has been confusing in the past is the corpus cavernosum spongiosum. When the blood's coming in, like in my video, the blood's coming in through this deep artery, right? So when that artery relaxes, it allows an influx of blood. What's filling up the corpus cavernosum and spongiosum is plasma that's leaking across this membrane, not actual blood. So this is not actually filling up with blood. What they did in that video is they cut all of this out and they put 2 balloons in there. So that's why you can never, as they said, that's why you can never get a normal reaction once you have the surgery. But again, what's happening here is not that the whole thing is filling up with blood. The blood's coming through this artery and it's creating so much pressure because of the volume that plasma is leaking out into that corpus cavernosum spongiosum. Does that make sense? So the whole thing's not filling up with blood. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to talk about female anatomy. And it's a slightly different story. Female anatomy. It's like not funny. Like women don't like name their vaginas and talk about them. They don't write songs about them like we do. Except Nicki Minaj, but other than that, I don't know of anybody who does. Nobody mails me vaginas in the mail after they graduate. It's a whole different story. In fact, I get in trouble even drawing female anatomy, so I have pictures this time. So we'll start here. I will draw them, but I want you to see some better pictures than I can draw. And I'll tell you why. There's a history. So the external genitalia involves the labia majora, of the major lips of the vagina, of the vulva. There's a labia minora, which is shown here. This is the entrance or opening to the vagina. And this is the clitoris, the glans clitoris, the external, I'm going to show you something pretty remarkable in a minute, the external portion of the clitoris, which is equivalent to the glans penis. So the glans clitoris is like homologous to the head of the penis. Then there's something called a Skene gland. Actually, I'm going to show you a pretty remarkable picture of that. The Skene glands are remnants of the prostate gland. Some women have lots of Skene gland or big Skene glands. Some women have smaller. They come in all different sizes. And in part, it depends on how much androgen you were exposed to during development, as we'll talk about later. And the same thing goes for the clitoris and the size of the labia. They're in part androgen dependent. So how much androgen you're exposed to during development and at puberty kind of determines the size of the genitalia. This structure, well, that opening, is the Bartholin's gland. The Bartholin's gland is the equivalent of the bulbourethral gland. Remember the one that sends out the pre-ejaculate. We're good? And here's a picture now of what the clitoris really looks like. Okay? So this is the part that's external. Okay? The part that's equivalent to the glans penis. And then all this, and I'll show you a picture in a minute, all this is the corpus cavernosum of the clitoris, which is inside, you can't see it. So it has the exact same erectile tissue as the penis. And this structure, what do they call it here? The bulb of the vestibule is a funny word. Who knows what vestibule means? It means like hallway or entrance. So this bulb of the vestibule, this is the equivalent of the corpus spongiosum. Again, it's all interior, and this is just below the labia majora, or the major lips of the vagina. And drawn in here is the labia minora, or the minor or the inner lips of the vagina, and they're connected to a prepuce, or hood, which is the equivalent of foreskin in men.
Can you repeat that?
So this is the glans clitoris, which is that's the part that you can see in some people, and it has a hood or a prepuce, just like the penis does. So there's a foreskin, if you will. Although when people talk about uh, circumcising. When people talk about circumcising women, it's very different than when you're talking about males. And I'll talk about that later. So there is a foreskin that's equivalent to the penile foreskin, but circumcision in men means just removing the foreskin. It means something very different in cultures where they talk about it in women. Oh, so what I was saying was, this big structure is the corpus cavernosum of the clitoris. So it works exactly like I just showed you in the video. In fact, we know most of what we know about erection and how that works from studies on the clitoris, not from studying the penis. So this is your corpus cavernosum. It fills up. It fills up exactly the same way we just talked about for men. And this structure is the corpus spongiosum for the clitoris. And again, it works. It fills up exactly the same way we just talked about.
So what's the difference between the spongiosum and the bulb?
Between what?
Spongiosum and the bulb?
It's the same thing. This is the equivalent. This is homologous to the corpus spongiosum. So this gets erect. So when there's arousal, this gets erect just like the corpus cavernosum, and this fills up. And this supposedly also blocks and helps the corpus cavernosum stay rigid or erect. And now I want to show you. Here you go to a website. I would not send you to a website that's pornographic. Trust me, I've looked at all of them and figured out the right ones to go to. When I first, I didn't. And that's actually something I don't joke about. Pornography. I didn't mean it that way. But you can go. You can get this. In fact, if you just type in clitoris.com, that's a very different website. That's not the one I would send you to. I had students send me angry letters. I'm like, no, it's theclitoris.com. And when I first found this website about 15 years ago, it was just the images that I'm going to show you now. But there's all kinds of things on there now. I'm going to encourage you to go to the website. You know what your sensitivities are. If you don't want to read the section on masturbation, don't read the section on masturbation. But I encourage you to go look at what I'm going to show you now. And for some reason now my laptop is working like it's supposed to. So whatever you did, you fixed it. Are we going there? No, it was working. Now it's not. Oh, I learned something. No thanks. Wait, no. No thanks. I want to do it here. This is let's see, if you go to anatomy, 3D anatomy is where I want you to go. So they have these structures, these 3D images that you can move. So what you're looking at now, again, this would be the only external part of the clip. So this is the only part you can see. I'll show you all the rest of this now. It's internal. So this would be the opening of the vagina, the labia majora, the labia minora, the external part of the clitoris, and you can turn these. And so you can see now the external, the glans clitoris, and all this erectile tissue is there, sort of surrounding the vagina. No, I don't want to see this movie. And it's, I mean, contemplate this. Amazing structure. The only role, the only thing the clitoris does is bring pleasure. Think about it. There's no other organ, no other part of the body that has the case. Even the penis, right? You gotta urinate through it. You gotta send our gametes through it. Orgasm is necessary for reproduction. I think probably the reason that men brag about their penises so much is they realize how inferior they are of the structure that has only one job. But here, I'll show you some of the other. So again, here's just another view that you can rotate And this is showing the corpus spongiosum. So see that? That's the labia majora there. This is the corpus spongiosum, and this is the corpus cavernosa, again, all erectile tissue. And this puts it in the context of the pelvis. And it's shown here the Bartholin's gland. And again, that's the gland. I told you 2 things about it. That's the gland. That's the equivalent of the bulbourethral gland in men, right? The bulbourethral gland, I told you, is the one that secretes the pre-ejaculate. The Bartholin's gland secretes the fluid that actually moistens the lips of the vagina. So it secretes the fluid that makes the major or minor lips of the vagina moist. It does not, and I learned this from a graduate student, it does not, the Bartholin's gland, lubricate the vagina. The vagina is lubricated by, you know how the blood's coming in and the plasma's being pressed out to the corpus cavernosum and spongiosum? The lubrication of the vagina is actually plasma being pushed out through the walls of the vagina from all the blood that's flowing there. So there's no glands in the vagina itself. There are no glands that are actually lubricating the vagina. That's all blood plasma that's being pushed from all the blood that's flowing there when you're aroused. Here's what I really want to show. I want to show all of it. Because as good of an artist as I am, I can't really illustrate. So this is like a view now. So again, there's the plane where the clitoris, the internal parts of the clitoris, the corpus cavernosa is the entrance to the vagina itself. The cervix is the muscle that actually separates the vagina from the uterus so that things just don't fall out. This and, well, all right, let me turn this. Here's what I think is amazing. Okay, so this is the entrance to the vagina. The cervix is somewhere here. This is the bladder. Who's ever seen, if you've taken anatomy, you've seen it, but who's ever seen this from this perspective? I'd never seen it until a few years ago, because the uterus actually loops over the bladder. Which I had no idea. If you've ever been around a pregnant woman and you have to pee like every 20 minutes, when you actually look at the way the uterus is really in, because you always see it from that straight-on view, like I'm going to draw it on the board, so you don't really appreciate actually how the anatomy is inside. So again, I'll do all this on the board, but those are the ovaries at the top. These are the ovaries, fallopian tube. That's the uterus. That's where the baby will be by next week that we're going to make. In there. So I think it's worth going to the website. Again, there are things there that, you know, if you don't want to look at, then don't look at it. If you don't want to look at the gallery of different size clitoris and stuff like that, then don't. But definitely go look at the images that are there and explore them. There's some political things there. You may or may not agree with that. All right. That's it for the show. Somebody figure out how to get the lights back on. What? Oh, I know. Okay, let's do the same thing we did for the males. The external genitalia. Or specifically the glans clitoris. I forgot one thing I want to show you. You can go to the website and see what it's about. And I used to draw out like the whole thing, like with the legs and stuff. And people complained. In fact, Sienna, she's a doctor now, we're still on Facebook. She wrote and said, I was the one who complained on your recommendation about, because I thought you drew the female anatomy in a way that wasn't so nice. You drew the man from the side, and you drew the woman from straight on. I contend that you can't draw a vagina from the side. But I succumbed, and I stopped drawing the legs and stuff, and then the last comment I got from named Josh, he said, oh, it looks like a screaming banana. So that's the best I can do. That's why I wanted to show you the photos, because that's the best I can do, and I played with somebody. That's it. That's the outside stuff. The inside stuff, you see now why I wanted to show you the pictures. These are the ovaries. And if you guys have had anatomy, you know that the names in much more detail than you have to know from me. But the uterus, the cervix is a muscle here. Vagina, fallopian tubes, and they have at the tips something called the fimbria. And the fimbria freaked me out when I was a little kid. Because I used to watch this show called Lost in Space. And Lost in Space, when the robots went bad, there was a machine that came around like this and sucked all the broken robots up on one of the episodes. And I saw this picture in one of my mom's books of the oocyte being sucked by the fimbria going down the fallopian tube. And it freaked me out that was inside my mom. Like I just, like, wow, my mom has like a robot sucker inside. I still shudder. If you look at the vagina, the uterus, the fallopian tubes, it all has that same arrangement I told you about before. So if I make a cut, oops, sorry. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, if you look at the uterus, it's a muscle layer surrounding an endothelial layer. Your blood vessels are like that, your digestive tract is like that, your blood vessels are all like that. There's a specific name. The muscle layer is called the myometrium. So it's a myoepiphyseal. Am I going too fast? Okay, you guys gotta stop me. The muscle layer is called a myometrium. And the inside layer is called an endometrium. And it's that muscle layer that's going to contract to deliver the baby, and it's the muscle layer, the fallopian tubes, that are going to help the oocyte move along. But when we get to an oocyte, we should ovulate today. Questions or comments? Yeah, what's your name? Oh, that's good. So yeah, I said what I want to say about the Bartholin's gland is that its role was making secretions that lubricate the labia. But I also was going to say sometimes it can get blocked. This actually happened to somebody I know. So it's very common it can get blocked and you can get a very painful cyst when it's blocked. That's the other thing. And I'll talk more on, what's today? Tuesday? I'll talk more on Thursday about sort of reproductive diseases and problems. Right now I just want to get to the normal stuff. We're good? Okay. reproductive axis. So this is the male with all of his negative feedback. Pretty simple. We do kind of the same thing every day. For females, for reproductively mature females, something different is happening every day. I don't know if I told you this, I think I did. But in males, most of the negative feedback from T, or probably all, is because it's converted to estrogen in the brain and hypothalamus and pituitary. So testosterone is probably doing nothing. Most of the negative feedback in males is because of T being converted into estradiol. In females, the axis is a little more complicated. LH still stimulates testosterone in the beginning of the cycle that I'm about to tell you about. But FSH, and you already know how to make all this. Imagine if I had to stop now and give you structures of steroids and talk about two-step. You already know all that stuff. Now we can talk about the real stuff. In addition, though, to LH stimulating testosterone, in the first 14 days of your perfect 28-day cycle that I'm sure everybody in this room has, FSH binds to the granulosa cells, I'll tell you where they are in a second, and stimulates aromatase. And you know how it does that. I want to talk about that. It does it through PKA and CREB and the other transcription factors SF1. So LH stimulates the testosterone in the ovary. The ovaries go through a cycle. The ovary starts out with follicles. So I'm going to show you the ovarian cycle first. Here, I'm going to blow this up on the other board. So what I'm drawing for you now is the ovary has follicles. So you know how the testis has tubules that are long tubes? See that, Diane? Give me a second. Give me brother some time. I'm getting there. The follicles of the ovary are completely spheres and closed up. So imagine they're just like tubules, except they're closed on all sides. So they're like balloons. And those balloons are made by granulosa cells. So these are cells that make up this ball. I think I told you before, blood never sees your oocytes. So blood is excluded from these follicles. And on the outside of these follicles are these interstitial thecal cells. And again, the LH is binding to the thecal cells to stimulate testosterone. And the FSH is stimulating the granulosa cells to take it up and turn it into estrogen. And you start growing 6 to 12 follicles, if you're a female, 6 to 12 follicles every month. But only one usually makes it. Unless you're a pup, unless you're another animal. I'll tell you why it's usually one to be. So these follicles start to grow primarily in response to FSH. And by growing, the thecal layer gets thicker, but also the follicle itself, the granulosa cells, themselves are increasing in number. So over the first 14 days, and there's one oocyte inside each follicle. See how they're getting bigger? And they get so big, one of them does anyway, that it fills up with fluid that's called an antrum. So it's like you're pumping a water balloon up with water. It starts to fill up. At the same time, we're going to come back to our hormones in a minute over here, our acids. Oh, man. What's happening over these first 14 days is that LH and FSH levels are going up. LH levels are going up. And they're much higher. They're like 1,000 times higher. I might have just made that number up. 1,000 times higher than FSH. But FSH is going up the same pattern, but it's 1,000 times lower than LH. Does that make sense? How can that be? Why would I ask you would it make sense or not? Yeah, what's your name? Scott. Exactly. So you'd think they're both being stimulated by GnRH. How come they're not at the same level? How come one? And I believe it. I think your book says like grams per liter, but they left off a P. I think it's picograms per liter. There's no way you have grams per liter FSH. So
Estrogen has stronger receptor, so as soon as your body starts making estrogen, it doesn't need to make much FSH.
okay, wait. No, but that's good. So estrogen's also going up. There are a couple things that are important. If you've heard Tom Carlson's class, you've already heard his explanation. Not his, but there are two schools of thought. So one is, why aren't LH and FSH going up in the same amount? And two, how can E2 be going up with LH and FSH if there's negative feedback? So some people argue that during this phase, there's positive feedback, and that estradiol is actually stimulating LH and FSH. Some people argue that there's positive feedback, that estrogen is actually stimulating LH and FSH. Other arguments are that negative feedback just isn't there, it's been removed. And data that support, am I going too fast?
You guys gotta say something.
Don't say anything, I think we're good. So one idea is that there's positive feedback, and that's why LH and FSH and E2 are all going up, because E2 is actually stimulating it. I don't really know the evidence of this guy. The other argument is that, well, no, there's just not negative feedback during this phase. Right? And what will support that is that estrogen induces its own receptor. So if there's no receptor or low receptor in the hypothalamus and pituitary, you have an absence of negative feedback. But as estrogen gets higher and higher and higher and induces its own receptor, then the feedback will come. That's what Tyrone told you. Tell Thomas said. Because estrogen, one of the things it does is it induces its own receptor. So as you get more and more estrogen, you increase your sensitivity to estrogen. So you're increasing your receptor. And that's true for all tissues. Because the other thing that's happening is that there's a uterine cycle. The endometrium is growing in thickness. So this soft layer inside the uterus, that's growing in thickness in response to estrogen. So in the uterus as well, there's an estrogen receptor, ER alpha. And as you go through the follicular, am I going too fast? As you go through the follicular phase, the uterus is becoming more and more sensitive to estrogen. Because and I could ask you an exam. Estrogen receptor gene has an ERE in it. The progesterone receptor is also increasing because there's an ERE in the progesterone receptor. So the uterus is growing in response to estrogen, and I realize I haven't answered the other question yet, I'm coming back. The uterus is growing in response to estrogen. You're making more and more estrogen, which means the uterus is getting more and more sensitive, and the endometrium is continuing to grow. Now, here's some crazy stuff.
Can you repeat what you were saying about progesterone?
The progesterone receptor is also going up. So estrogen is not only making the uterus more sensitive to estrogen, it's making the uterus more sensitive to progesterone as well. Progesterone isn't playing a role yet. Okay, you ready? You see why we did men first. So, it's not clear how important it is in humans, but GnRH, which can be regulated by stress or melatonin, may play an important role in human female. But the reason FSH is lower than LH, you're going to love this, is because inhibin specifically blocks FSH. Inhibin specifically negative feedback on FSH. And you know how we discovered that? Or you know how that was discovered? Do we have any non-identical twins here? You? Does it run in your family?
We have 2 sets of non-identical.
Yeah.
So it's,
And the reason is that women who ovulate more than one egg, who make more than one egg, have an insensitivity to inhibin. And that's why it usually runs in the family, because they have a receptor that doesn't respond to the inhibin. You guys are probably too young to remember Octomom. Yeah. So the reason when they want to do in vitro fertilization, they inject people with extra FSH, and that's why you have more than one follicle grow. So the inhibin is there to keep you from growing more than one egg, and it's kind of a race as to which of these 6 to 12 follicles win. Because one of these follicles will ovulate. That means the oocyte pops out, and it gets sucked down the fallopian tube. I've actually seen videos of the fimbriae, that little cilia that beat, and so the egg is like temporarily suspended in space and gets sucked down the fallopian tube. I've seen it in vitro. Pretty neat. So somehow, and I'll tell you two papers I just read today. So somehow one follicle wins. It's kind of like whichever follicle gets to be the biggest, it makes enough inhibin that now FSH goes down and the rest of the follicles don't make it. Does that make sense? So every month, 6 to 12 of your follicles start trying to mature. One of them, because maybe it's more sensitive to FSH, will make it, but then that one's making enough inhibin, they're all making inhibin, that the others will just become treated, they'll just die.
Which cells making inhibin?
Sorry?
Which cells making
They're coming from the granulosa. They come from the Sertoli cells in men. I don't know how important inhibin is in men. And it's a little more complicated. Yeah.
So are the other ones just backup?
No, initially there's just enough FSH to get a bunch started, and typically one wins. And other animals, like, you know, the animals that have like 6 to 12 in their litter, they don't have that same sensitivity. And the other example is in people who have twins, they don't have a sensitivity to inhibin. The other thing that seems to be important, that I just read this morning, is that also the follicle that wins is probably the one that makes the LH receptor the fastest. So I literally just read this morning. So it turns out, I'm going to go too fast. It turns out that estrogen, estradiol, induces the LH receptor. Estrogen induces the LH receptor, and it induces aromatase. So the follicle that has the most estrogen